Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. Today we have with us Jeremy Pollack, who's the founder of Pollack Peacebuilding Systems. Jeremy, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. Hey, I love the name of your system, Peacebuilding System, because it's focused on the good. It's not focused on conflict resolution, even though we know that's what you're solving. So we focus on the positive to draw people toward that and away from the negative. But give us a little bit of your background, and then what led you to come up with the Peacebuilding System.
Sure. I mean, personally, I came a little bit more from an academic background initially, and then I started going into the applied field. So I was trained as an anthropologist, an evolutionary psychologist in graduate school, and then I was, sort of studying cooperation and conflict at the group level, and was really interested in that. And simultaneously, I was working as a coach. I've been a private practice coach for a little over a decade. And, just started kind of merging the two, really interested in, how to help people navigate interpersonal conflicts, interpersonal communication challenges, especially, I was dealing, many of my clients are entrepreneurs and, CEOs and executives and that kind of thing. And so I was starting to deal a lot with communication at work, and I was really interested in that. So went back to school, I got a master's in conflict resolution and peacebuilding, and which kind of helped me use some of the theory in an applied way, and then sort of launch this company once I graduated, and started working more officially as a coach and a trainer specifically in conflict resolution. And then it kind of grew from there, and started bringing on other consultants that are in this field, and growing a little bit of the company. And now we're kind of working nationwide with both small and large companies, doing coaching and training and conflict resolution services we call workplace peacemaking services. So helping people get along better at work when there's some issues.
And when you end that statement with when there's some issues, obviously, when there's an issue, we need help. But I always like to think in terms of how can you prevent those issues from even coming up in the first place. So I'm sure you would love to get with a company and go, okay, we fixed those two issues, but now let's get you on this path so that those don't crop up again like those. And then also other types of issues, don't crop up. So if we can have this mindset and this underlying peace building, going on, is that an approach that you take so that they, fix what they got now and, you put the Band-Aid on, but then we keep you from going out and causing that to crop up again?
Yeah, absolutely. So peace building traditionally, if you look at peace building in the sort of international conflict arena, it really was developed with this idea of conflict transformation. And what that means is there's usually like a presenting issue. There's some challenge between two groups or two people, and we kind of have to deal with that. But once we go in there, the peace building transformational part of it is looking at the entire system, looking at the organization, looking at the culture within which these issues are emerging, and discovering what's going on in the culture here, what's going on in the system that's allowing for these conflicts to emerge, and having sort of to deal with that as well. So that is really what peace building is about, is looking at that two-pronged approach, both the acute and also the systemic or long-term sort of issues in an organization or in a system. It's our culture. So that's, typically when we engage for conflict resolution services, so like someone comes to us and says, we've got these two individuals, two employees aren't getting along, two executives, et cetera. We need some help because one of them is going to end up getting fired if we don't get help, and then it's going to lead to a lawsuit and all kinds of stuff. So we come in there and we try to help fix the problem, and we've been pretty successful, or we help them peacefully separate without having to go into lawsuit territory. So we try to transform that acute conflict, but then that always typically leads to a wider engagement with an organization, because during that process, we discover a lot of things that are going on with other people that are, sort of not involved directly in this acute conflict. But, the leadership has a lot to do with it. The culture itself has a lot to do with it. There's sort of best practices that the organization is not following. And a lot of times what we'll do is we'll propose, a wider engagement with them. And that can include any number of methods, including, training is one thing that we do a lot of. And that is a very preventative, proactive measure, is just training employees, training executive teams on how to better resolve conflicts, how to better communicate, how to better give constructive feedback and receive feedback and that sort of thing. So certainly we want to do as much as we can to prevent it and create healthier cultures so that these sort of issues don't present themselves that end up, potentially leading to legal problems, financial problems, that kind of thing.
And you talk about best practices, so I want to, maybe pick one or two that are some good low-hanging fruit best practices as an example. But it makes me think of something where you come into a specific conflict and you go, okay, let's get the lay of the land. Here's what we need to do. Here's a best practice. We need to do this. Do you work with the organization until everyone's high-fiving and hugging? Or is it where you work with them to say, here's what we need to do, and now my time is through, and now here's what you need to continue, and then now maybe it starts to dwindle off? How does that look for the organization?
Yeah, I mean, at first we typically are very engaged. We kind of embed ourselves in as intensely as the organization will allow, and then our goal really is to help implement practices and get leadership trained up and put some best practices in terms of just systemic culture in place so that, they can run on their own. They don't need to be relying on any external party forever. That's our goal, is to kind of put them in a better place. But we do end up kind of staying on board, at least in a very sort of, subtle helping to keep the peace, doing a little coaching here and there, just for, once a month we'll check in and we'll do like a team meeting and check in on how things are going, and, make sure people are being held accountable and stuff like that. So we a lot of times do continue kind of ongoing and a low engagement, but certainly our goal is to get them, self-sustaining, so that they don't have to kind of rely on us.
Yeah, it's kind of like teach your kid to ride a bike and they're using training wheels, and okay, well, that's great for a while, but then at some point you got to take the wheels off and run alongside them, and then at some point you need to let go because that's not sustainable.
Yeah, it's like the old adage. I like that old adage too. That's a good one. And then the one where you don't give a fisherman fish. Give him a fishing pole and teach him how to fish. So he doesn't.
Yeah.
He doesn't need
that's
you
good.
to fish it.
So let's talk about some best practices. When you come in, what are typically things that you're seeing that need to be done, and then best practices of where you're going to start to help them get that resolved?
Well, yeah, I mean, so on an interpersonal level, there's any number of things that could present. I mean, just in terms of best practices for individuals, like learning how to effectively communicate when there's an issue, when they're having a problem that could turn into a conflict. How do you effectively give someone some feedback? How do you respond effectively to feedback when someone's having a problem with you, and that kind of thing? On a systemic level, or a sort of more a culture-wide level, there's some things that are typically that we find not to be in place, especially with the medium-sized businesses. Now, some of the really large companies, the Googles and that kind of thing, they have like culture. The whole department sort of focused on culture and that kind of. So, but companies that are in the below 100 employees up to 5,000 employees and stuff. A lot of times they don't have that necessarily, and even HR is kind of overwhelmed and they don't have enough time to put things into place. So, a couple of low-hanging fruit that I just like to look for right off the bat is do they have a general code of civility? A lot of people, they have employee handbooks where there's conduct codes and all that stuff, but no one's really looking at those, and they're not explicit about how do we treat each other in this organization. What is our culture when it comes to treating each other well? And having that in place and having some accountability around that is important. Another thing that they often don't have is 360 feedback programs. So leaders, they may be doing sort of regular reviews with their employees, but they very rarely are getting reviews by their employees. So they're not getting any feedback because they're just not interested, or they don't want to hear it. They don't want to get any feedback from the people that are directly reporting to them. And that's important. And if you don't do that, if at least there's not regular one-on-ones with, direct reports and getting their feedback and like, what more do you need from me? How can I be a better leader for you? If that's not happening, that typically leads to a lot of, conflict and resentment and that kind of thing. Unless it's a stellar leader, and we do find some of those, but a lot of times when we work with companies, there's some problems with leadership. So those two things are just low-hanging fruit for me, just sort of what I look for right off the bat. You're doing 360s and one-on-ones, and do you have a code of civility that people can attain to?
And those are easy things that if you don't have them, you can put in. But I would also suspect that there could be a little pushback of code of, I don't know, what's it really what's it really gonna do? Because it's kind of like our mission statement. We created it, and it sits in our framed frame on the wall. So how do you, once they do put that code of civility in, how do you get them to then make sure it gets, embedded in the organization?
Yeah. So I think one thing that we do is, and I highly recommend this when they're open to this, is connecting the two things together that I mentioned. So the code of civility and the 360 reviews, and what those reviews are. If they entail aspects of the code of civility. So when we do our reviews, let's say we do a quarterly 360 feedback session where I'm getting feedback from my direct reports, they're getting feedback from me, and we can sort of talk about each of the points on the code of civility. We can even give each other ratings on those. And if we get low ratings on them, so like we have 10 points on the code of civility, and I'm going to give you a rating on each of those 10 points, and you're going to give me a rating. And we're going to go through the ratings together at a session, and we're going to look at those and go, how, I'm on a low rating on this, on this one particular point. How could I improve? What could I do to improve there? So really embedding that into your sort of feedback system, I think would be one way of doing it. And there's other ways of sort of being accountable and creating measurements of accountability. I think culture surveys are important, but they should only really be given if the results are going to be presented and there's going to be some solutions presented as a result. And that can also, the code of civility can also be embedded into the culture surveys as like, are we living, you can put those into each item. It's like, are we living up to these items on our code of civility? So checking in with those, measuring those, making sure that people are communicating effectively, treating each other with respect, feeling inspired by each other, that kind of thing is as important.
Let's talk a little bit about your book, Conflict Resolution Playbook. I love the sound of the word playbook because it gives me the idea like, if there's a conflict, then tell me the steps to take to resolve it. Right. So what are some things the readers are going to be able to pull away from and learn from the book?
Yeah, so I break the book up into 4 sections. The first section is just a general overview of conflict and general sort of best practices in communication. And then the next 3 chapters are diving into very specific examples. So you might find like how to deal with a gaslighter, how to deal with a bully, how to deal with insubordination at work, how to deal with a supervisor, how to stay cool when things get heated, that kind of stuff. And there's personal examples, there's professional examples. So it's kind of both for people at work and at home. And each chapter is like a little, it starts with a little story typically of something that I've actually consulted on, changing the names, of course. So I give them a little story about, how this conflict came about. And then I give them, if they are dealing with something similar, here are some practical steps. And I give them some very practical techniques to use, some communication sequences to use to help resolve or manage or even prevent some conflicts from emerging from those particular scenarios.
And it kind of makes me also think of when you have a problem, conflict, how do you advise an organization to deal with it if they come to you and say, but we really don't want to be too hard on this person because they're a major player in our sales or whatever. We don't want to rock the boat too much, but we know it can't go any further. How do you balance that? Because if you come in and, tough love or whatever the case is, you don't want to have that person go, fine, I'm out of here, because now there's a big hole and a gap. So I would suspect that takes a really, targeted approach.
Yeah, that is pretty much the case for every single case that we work on. is they're not going to come to us and spend the money to get this person trained or coached or work with them if they're not a valuable employee. If it's someone who just like, they're causing a problem, let's get rid of them, they don't come to us. So typically everyone we work with is a valuable employee. The company doesn't necessarily want to lose them, or they don't mind losing them and they want to, they don't want to get sued essentially. But most of the time it's because they don't want to lose this employee or this executive. So to approach the executive, so we work with companies we have sort of, some like not email, but like sort of communication templates that we work with to approach an executive or an employee with our type of service, to do it in a soft way where we give the individual a lot of agency in being able to volunteer to work with us. And there's different, we have to kind of gauge the personality of the individual. Sometimes we'll have a conversation with that individual if they're open to it. And, we work with the company in a very customized way to introduce it. A lot of times they have relationships with them, and so they can kind of, it's no news to the person who they're talking about. It's no news to them. There's problems. There's already been complaints. Typically, there's already been some issues and some conflicts, and so it's not news to them. So typically, it would take someone saying, listen, we really value you as an employee. We want you to have a great experience here. We need you. But certain things aren't working, and so are you open to us working this out and getting a little help from this outside party? Here's what they do, and we're also going to be working with them, and so it's not just you. We're not singling you out. We're having other people work with them too. So different approaches depending on who the individual is. But that's something that definitely needs to be. It can be delicate. I mean, some people are super open to it. Sometimes we get reached out to by the executives themselves who are recognizing they are having problems, and they go to their company and go, "Hey, I need some help. I need coaching. I found this company. Can you contact them?" So that happens. But a lot of times it's the sort of the heads of the company coming to us and saying, we've got a problem with this employee and we need some help with them.
So let's use that as an example. How many times do you start working with that employee and they go, "Oh my word, I have no clue. I'm an open book. Guide me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. I will change." Right? How many times is it that versus maybe pushback?
I'd say it's probably the people that we work with are typically pretty happy to get help. I would say 70% of the time. The person who is working with us are really glad that we're coming in there because they've had this issue. They've had these issues. They don't know what else to do. They are feeling validated that their company has thought enough of them and enough of the problem that they're not sweeping it under the rug anymore, and they're willing to spend the resources and the time to hire a professional consulting company to come in and help. So that really helps. That helps them feel validated and that their issues are real. And so they're welcoming some help finally, and they're welcoming help from a third party because it's like they've dealt with their own company. They don't want to deal with HR, because HR is on working for the company, and so they're typically very happy. There have been times though, I would say, maybe 20 to 30% of the time when someone feels like they're being a little bit forced to work with us, and we don't like that because coaching is very ineffective if it's not volunteer. But the good news is that when we start doing some private coaching with people, we're pretty good at building rapport very quickly. I've personally worked with people that the first session is all about basically them coming to me and saying, "I don't trust you. You're working for the company. I don't trust you. I don't really want to do this." And it's a barrier, and I have to show how much I care about them as an individual. And I'm not here to make sure the company is okay. I'm here to care about them and help them in any way I can, even if that means they want to leave the company, whatever that means for them. And then so that level of care and build rapport, builds trust, and then they start to let me in a little bit.
Yeah, I think you used a great word there, delicate. It's a delicate situation. Yeah. And for the employers hearing that response, you don't have some cookie cutter template that's just like, my way or the highway. Let's get action. It's delicate. You're gonna handle it in the appropriate fashion. So I really think that this is such a huge, you're the bad apple spoils the bunch. It's such a huge thing in organizations that needs to be handled. So Jeremy, thanks for coming on today. Let's just wrap up with how can people learn more about your organization, pick up a copy of your book. I'll make sure that the link to Amazon is in the show notes, but I think that would be great to get some good contact information for you.
Yeah, I mean, we're at PollackPeacebuilding.com if anybody wants to check us out. Always happy to help anyone that needs some help, or even just needs, sort of some tips on how to prevent conflict. We have a lot of good content up there. We put content up every day on new research coming out on workplace conflict resolution practices and stuff like that. And then if they want to go to, my book is available on Amazon and other booksellers. It's called the Conflict Resolution Playbook.
Excellent. Jeremy, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneursradio.com.